Gracias for pressing play y welcome to Smart Chickens, a working together smarter, where diversity meets innovation and growth podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Michael Sabbag. He is an expert in organizational development and leadership and author on culture, performance strategy, and coaching. I had the pleasure of working with Michael at Learn.com, a SaaS leader in the HR, ERP, and training and development software space, which was acquired by Taleo, and then Taleo was ultimately acquired by Oracle. We have an interesting conversation around his background growing up and what the Boy Scouts and working summers in construction with his father taught him early on in life about work ethic and leadership. We unpack his book, Developing Exemplary Performance One Person at a Time, which focuses on the 7 factors that drive exceptional work performance. Based on his leadership and organizational development training research spanning decades of his real-life experiences across diverse industries and organizations. We also discuss his point of view around diversity leadership and his current role within one of the largest public healthcare organizations in South Florida, Broward Health, during C-19 and its impact on the healthcare workforce. As always, this podcast is brought to you by our good friends at digitechie.com, a conversational marketing demand gen and 6-figure sales pipeline revenue accelerator consultancy, and gypsyforever.com, uniquely handmade wellness products that help you connect your mind, body, and soul to achieve a better balanced you. So a little background on Michael. He has dedicated his entire career to helping organizations become more successful by creating highly engaging cultures and exemplary people processes, working in learning and development, human resources, and organizational development in C-level capacities and as a consultant. He has worked in organizations for over 18 years and has consulted for about 16 of those. Author of Developing Exemplary Performance One Person at a Time, which was published by Davies Black and ATD Press. He's received South Florida Business Journal Excellence in Human Resource Awards, received a Master's of Arts in IO Psychology with a focus on improving workforce performance. He's been certified in executive coaching as an ECCP, Executive Coach Certified Professional. Achieved the rank of Eagle Scouts, which is less than 0.2% of Boy Scouts achieve this rank. And he is currently the Director of Leadership and Organizational Development at Broward Health, the largest Florida public health system with over 8,000 employees across 30 hospitals and specialty care clinics serving over 1 million in combined patient populations. So vamos, let's dive into the show. And without further ado, here's Michael Sabbag. Michael, how are you? Good morning. Today on our podcast series around cultural diversity and how it impacts growth and innovation in companies of all sizes. And we'd love to learn a little bit about your background. So if you could tell our listeners here your background and your journey with training and development and leadership organizations.
So I think I'm weird. And the reason is because I decided to make a career out of learning and development. And I decided that early on when I first finished graduate school. I thought about how I can apply what I've learned in graduate school and in undergraduate, and I actually purposely went into training and development. Most people that I've found, that I've talked with and become friends with in the field and colleagues, they started off different. They started off in an operational role, and then they found that they liked being the go-to person to train people. And then they learned more about training and became really good at facilitating adult learning in the classroom. And then as technology evolved, they got good at virtual modalities of training. But I'm weird because I've always been interested in this. In college, my first major was, and I don't think you even know this, Gianni, but my first major was aerospace engineering. And I started studying aerospace engineering, and then I was like, wow, it's kind of nice as a hobby, but this is just not the profession that I want to be in. And so I floundered for a while and decided to combine business and psychology. As a kid, I'd always loved business. I had like lemonade stands when I was like 6 and 7 years old. And I was actually in the newspaper because my friend who lived across the street from me and I, we had a lemonade stand. We got like $6.30. And when you're 6 years old and have no concept of money, that was a ton of money. And we weren't sure what to do with it. You know, we weren't like into candy, and we had bikes, so we didn't need bikes or anything for our bikes. And my dad was doing a project, a carpentry project, because he was a finished carpenter by trade and did construction his whole life at the Easter Seals. And so we decided to donate our money to Easter Seal Clinic. And they were so impressed that these 6-year-old kids would do that. They had reporters there and everything. But I've always loved business. I was in junior achievement as a child, where I learned all of the fundamentals of operating a business from an entrepreneur's perspective.
Sure.
We sold little trivets that you use for hot plates. My mom still has one in her kitchen from a long time ago when I was a kid and sold them. But then I also was fascinated by the human condition. And so that's why I ultimately went into industrial psychology. I liked the business, I liked the human condition. So I really wanted to get an in-depth perspective on why people do things, and especially in the workplace, and how to use positive motivational techniques so that it's a win-win situation where people are getting out of it what they want, intrinsically motivated. And at the same time, the business is moving forward because people are performing at a high level. So I did that, and I've been in training and development my whole career.
Yes, I know. I was fortunate enough to work with you in a short period of time at Learn.com when you were VP of Talent and talent management. It was a HR software platform that later got acquired by Oracle, right? And I think is now also part of the Taleo family of platforms and products that are in HR. So talk me through a little bit about your own journey that, got you from, mid-sized startups to some global companies like Sixt out of Europe in the mobility services, carpooling, rental cars, and you leading the U.S. Training and development teams, and now most currently at Broward Health, probably one of the largest healthcare systems in South Florida, and what you're doing there in terms of their your role there as I believe it's director of organizational leadership, correct? And
Yeah.
And so explain to us a little bit, if you could, how you've navigated through those different industries and how you've applied your authored book, The 7 Factors for Peak Performance. And if you could unpack that for us and give us a little bit of your insights in what you've learned from, software startups to right now, a very interesting time, I'm sure, at a healthcare, company during a global pandemic.
Yes. So, like everyone, I've had a unique journey. Everyone that I've talked with has followed a different path, so to speak. I started off with small companies and then went to a Fortune 100 company. The small company was a company called Vacation Break, which was mainly timeshares and vacation packages. And I was the reservations trainer, but then I also started doing leadership development with them because the person in charge of leadership development didn't have much of an instructional design background. So I was helping him out in addition to my regular duties. After that, I went to what is now Comcast. It was Continental Cablevision, and then it was acquired by Media One, US West, and became Media One. Right. And we were the 3rd largest cable provider in the United States. Then we were acquired by AT&T, and they made another acquisition at the time, and we were the largest cable provider in the United States. And then AT&T Broadband was acquired by Comcast. There I started off as a sales trainer, and then was promoted to leadership instructor, and then promoted to manager of leadership development. So to put it in perspective, the smaller companies I've worked with have had anywhere from 70 to 150 employees. At Media One and AT&T Broadband, we had 121 employees just in training, just on the training side of business.
Wow.
We had 60,000 employees throughout the US. So it was a really interesting change to go from a small startup entrepreneurial type of company to a larger organization, a Fortune 100 company.
Right. With a matrix chart, more of a matrix organization when you're talking about a Fortune 100 organization, right?
With smaller organizations, there's more of a direct line of control.
Right.
I worked in learning and development at a smaller company as a trainer. I reported to the training director. The training director reported to the COO. Very straight line. At Media One, we were more of a matrixed organization. So I reported to the director of training when I became well, in all of my roles within the region, but then I also had a corporate responsibility where I was actually, of all 120 people, I was the only one below director level that led a corporate team. And my team was putting together the infrastructure of training within the department. So all of our practices around instructional design, classroom facilitation, communications, measurement of training, all of that was done by my team. All of those processes were designed by my team. So for that, I reported to the vice president of training, who reported to the CEO. For the work within the region, I reported to the director of training for the region. And I think one of my biggest takeaways is that the quality of leadership determined the quality of my work. It didn't necessarily have to do with my innate abilities, so much as the great leaders that I had there motivated me through opportunities to do the type of work that was really interesting to me, but still also rewarding me through positive reinforcement and through recognition for the mundane types of things that I had to do, like the administration of training, which I hated, right, and still hate. I hate all that paperwork stuff.
Yes.
And reaching out to participants, advertising the classes, the marketing side of it, I leave that up to you.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? Unpack that a little bit, because an organization like AT&T, Fortune 100, lives and dies by the quality of their sales and customer support. So when you're in charge of creating the training and development for sales leadership, down from a call center sales rep to the regional director of that sales group, and then leading up to a VP of sales, walk us through what you're seeing are the best strategies to kind of build the bridge, right, with those C-levels and the operational directors down to your actual, in the B2B world, it would be called, your SDR, sales development reps, or business development reps, right? How do you manage to get consensus? And to your point, it all starts from the top down. So if you get the right kind of leadership that appreciates and understands the importance of training and development, instructional design, and how that could impact the bottom line, how do you find that you've seen across the different industries getting that buy-in from your partners in the C-table that are on the operations sides, on marketing as well, to help promote some of these training and development courses, right? What have you used? What tactics have you seen are effective to kind of bridge that?
So that's a really interesting question. There's a lot to that question. I can't say that any one event was more important than the other, because over the years, as I've learned more about leadership, about effective leadership traits, about the evolving research in leadership development, my opinions really evolved as well. So starting off, I thought, well, my frontline leader, person I report with, as long as I have a good relationship with her or him, I'm fine. Right. And now I know that there's more to it, that they're impacted by the culture of the organization, by their leaders. Their leaders are impacted by the top leaders of the organization. The top leaders are impacted by the board. The board is impacted by the pressures that they have in the communities that we serve, in our entire ecosystem. And so it's really evolved my thinking and the way that I work with organizations. And I've tended to work with organizations from two perspectives. One is, and it really depends on the organization, what tactic I take. So with some organizations that are a little bit more progressive, that call me in more proactively because they see where they are now, but they know they can get better. And they're not calling me in because they're like in dire pain right now. With those organizations, I tend to start from the top down. And I start with the top and look, and it's funny because this has a little bit to do with training from a really good instructional design perspective. You start with the organization's strategy and where we want to go and what we want to achieve. But I start at even the higher level with the organization's identity. I've defined the organization's identity as being its purpose, its mission, its vision, and its values. And collectively, those form what the organization is. The values are probably the biggest driver of organizational culture, along with the behaviors that either align with its purpose and its mission and its vision and values or not. So at the end of the day, I want to take a look at all of those factors. Who is the organization? What do we want to achieve? And everything that we do has to link to that. The next layer down from that are the strategies. The strategies are really the game plans for over the next few years. How are we going to go to market with our products? How are we going to price our products? Who's our target market? How are we going to really speak to their heart and their head? All of those factors go into the major macro organizational strategies, as well as your macro people strategies. So for example, at one of my clients, we purposely decided we hire people that are experienced at what they do and then provide incremental development, as opposed to other organizations that hire people out of college and develop them from the ground up. It's just a different approach, but that's part of their talent acquisition strategy, and it aligns with their talent development strategy. So as my career has progressed and my thoughts have evolved, it really comes down mostly to senior leadership. And what are the behaviors that are reinforced? And what are the behaviors that are punished in some way, either through people engaging in those behaviors and not really being recognized as a high performer, or actively punished because they violate rules or policies or guidelines that they have around effective behaviors.
So in light of what we're living through right now in corporate America, we had maybe a couple of years ago the Me Too movement. We are definitely in a diversity matters movement that's happening because of things outside of just the business culture, right? What do you see that's evolving? And you've seen it evolve over the years, but in terms of getting leadership from a value congruence perspective, let's say, right? So creating those cultures that have values that are already emphasize inclusion, diversity, upward mobility, and opportunities for trajectories and growth paths. What are you seeing? And based on your book also that you wrote and research that you've done, what are you seeing that is getting more emphasis these days to try to help us get through this, right? So if you could think about some examples of the last couple of companies you worked at, even right now working at a healthcare organization that has its own challenges around HIPAA compliance, around training and hiring, or hiring sort of freezes or different types of hiring because of PPP equipment that may or may not be available. All those things. If you could kind of unpack that a little bit so that it puts a little bit of an emphasis on what are some of the strategies that you're seeing around that.
So what's really interesting is the leadership development, diversity and inclusion training, any of the what's called soft skills. I call them more interpersonal skills because they're not soft, they're actually the hardest part of business. Any of those it's not different. The times have changed, the conversation has changed, the awareness of these have changed, but the human condition hasn't changed. Right. People still want to be recognized, rewarded. They want to have a level playing field. And that's what we're really arguing for here in the current times. All of this that we're seeing, if you take out the extremes, if you take out the people that are looting and all of that crazy stuff, and just look at the people that really want change, they want a level playing field. They want to be treated fairly. And that's no different from 40 years ago when there were social movements 40 years ago.
Sure.
It's no different from when Media One sent me to a week-long training called Managing Inclusion, because they wanted to make sure that everyone had a fair and equal chance at the organization, that there was no discrimination based upon any aspect of the diversity that had nothing to do with your job. And so the conversations just evolved and changed and is more prevalent now. I imagine that because a lot of the conversations driven by the media, when the media loses focus on this, the conversation will die down, but the times won't change. This is still a desire of people, and the progressive organizations that I've either consulted to or been part of will continue to focus on making sure that there's a level playing field, that everyone, regardless of their background, has an equal opportunity.
So to unpack that in terms of programs that you've seen that could work, for example, are you seeing a rise on mentorship programs, on succession planning, right? So when we think about like generational workforce, Generation Z, it's coming to its own. Millennial generation, right, are looking to get into mid-management levels, for example, right?
Yeah.
Generation X, we're already maybe at senior levels within organizations. And baby boomers may or may not be retiring. They may be passing on the baton, or they may be extending their stay because of their knowledge. And frankly, because of, they don't want to also be discriminated for ageism, right? There's no reason why someone who's in their 60s or, getting into their 70s could sit on a board or could still be part of the conversation at a C level and help organizations with their aggregate knowledge that they've had over the years, right? What are you seeing around that in terms of what are some strategies, what are some programs that you've found to be useful, whether it's on your research or book for the 7 factors of peak performance. And maybe then what we could do is get into your book a little bit, describe how you got into writing the book. Why did you decide to do that in the first place? It's not easy to write a book. I've heard from other guests that have written books that it's like owning a boat. Everyone wants to own a boat, and then when you own the boat, you wish you were just renting it because it doesn't. It took a lot of work, effort, and it may not be what it cracked up to be. So, give us a little bit of your insight onto those 2 questions.
When we think about where we are now and how we are really seeing social movements that are not very different from other social movements in the past, I think that the organizations that have paid attention to people in the workplace and the employee experience, and some organizations have even created metrics around the employee experience.
Sure.
Those organizations are positioned well to respond to the increase in demand for these types of things. Again, it's about the human condition. To give you a little bit of background, a lot of the training that is done in leadership development is around helping leaders communicate more effectively with people and manage their performance, but using a positive approach. In 2003, I left Comcast. They restructured, and I decided to start my own consulting practice. And that's when I started doing the research for what ultimately became my book, because I was really fascinated by what are the factors that drive performance in the workplace. And I found that the organizations that take a strengths-based approach outperform those that took more of a gap-based approach. Okay. To explain the difference, a strengths-based approach is where I take a look at all of the things you do. And then of the things you do, what do you can do consistently at or above standard every time? Those are considered strengths. The other things where you might do them above standard, you might kind of slack off and not do them well, those are considered weaknesses. Everyone has both. There's no judgment in calling something a weakness. But they've kind of set those aside. Organizations with a gap-based approach would focus on developing weaknesses. Organizations with a strength-based approach would take a look at those strengths and say, what kind of strength is it? Is it what I call in my book an exemplary strength, meaning I'm best in class? Or is it an expandable strength, meaning that it's a strength now, but I can actually grow it to be something that is at the exemplary level? And then I focus on growing my expandable strengths and leveraging my exemplary strengths, which has a very beneficial effect. It's very much more motivating. So in 2009, my book was published with really two key things that people who've read it take away. One is a strengths-based coaching approach. Reason I'm circling back to that is because that is the best approach for working with people in the workplace. From a diversity and inclusion perspective, from a motivation perspective, from a performance perspective, from even just a human condition perspective, coaching people in the workplace is the best skill that a leader can have and the most impactful skill that a leader can develop. The other part of the book is titled Developing Exemplary Performance One Person at a Time. And so the other thing is that we want to find out why they're performing the way they are. And so I developed the 7 factors model. The 7 factors are 7 factors that drive performance in the workplace. And one of those factors or more are present in every expandable strength, as this is the factor that's at cause most. In exemplary strength, all of the factors are there. So I am motivated, motivation being one of the factors. There's clear expectations and I'm being held positively accountable, meaning my leader is holding me accountable through supporting me and looking for opportunities to praise me or to recognize me in some way. There is a good process behind the work that I do, a best-in-class process that's been well thought out, maybe even rigorously researched to make sure that we are following the best practice in terms of the process that we follow. The environment that I work in is a positive environment. So the way that my workspace is set up is good. I've got great relationships with the people that I work with. The environment outside of work is managed as well. And every high performer that I interviewed for my book, they were able to balance work and personal life. And that was an individual choice as to how they balanced that. But it was balanced, and things that happened outside of work were managed well, and things that happened at work were managed well, no matter how stressful the situation.
That's an interesting point in one of your factors, because I think sometimes that gets lost whenever you do any kind of modeling or research, the fact that there's the outside of work environment and how that can impact you positive or negatively when you're at work, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting point when I read up on the 7 factors that I thought, how was this, we know this is evolving, right? Always the work-life balance, but it's interesting that it's one of your factors. So go ahead. I think you were on to the last one or close to one.
Yeah, there's a couple others. The tools and resources that I have are perfect for the job that I do. My computer's not always crashing. I have
system software.
Really good software to use, exactly. I have the skill and knowledge to do my job at that exemplary level. So I have an advanced knowledge of how can I perform at this level. And then the talent and fit factor is one of the hardest ones for leaders to wrap their heads around. Talent is, the way that I define it in my book, I look at both the nature and nurture of talent. A lot of the research and a lot of the work around talent is focused more on it being part of your genetic makeup. I feel like that is part of it, but the other part of it has to do with your psychological makeup. How are you wired? What's your worldview? What are your perceptions of the way things work? And how was that informed and solidly ingrained into an individual? Those items all collectively, both the nature and the nurture part of it, it's the innate things like my height, the way my brain is wired, as well as the learned things like I have preferences for certain types of people in the workplace. Since I worked construction as a kid with my dad, I worked from the age of 7 to the age of 19. Every summer I would work with him. Usually just picking up garbage and throwing it in the dumpster, but then I learned to frame out walls and hang drywall and do finish carpentry.
Sure.
That informed my worldview. You know, I saw that people who were ambitious, that wanted to learn more, were the ones that were getting ahead. And so that's something that hasn't changed over the years. That's part of who I am. Mm-hmm. That's one of the talent factors that make up me, is who I am. The fit part is me choosing to use those abilities that are a function of my talent within the context of the workplace where I am.
Well, that was a great recap of the 7 factors that you have in your book. If people do want to learn more about your book, can you once again say the title? Excuse me, the title. And also, I know that you can find it on Amazon, but where else could they potentially look for it?
Yeah, if you just do a search on Amazon, you'll come up with it. Or you can go to my website, michaelsabbag.com. It's Developing Exemplary Performance One Person at a Time. It's a mouthful. I learned as a first-time publisher that there's some things outside of your control. The title of your book is one of those things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But you know what? Funny enough, though, I'm obviously, my background is in digital marketing or marketing, as you know. And for Google's algorithm, when you have titles that have 14 characters or more, there's better opportunities and chances they will get picked up if they have certain keywords in it. So perhaps in the publishing world, that applies as well, since they're publishing and putting the book on Amazon and all sorts of digital storefronts. That could be maybe one of the reasons for it. So, you know, I know that your journey has also been impacted, like you said, from the nurture nature. So you talk about, you know, growing up and helping your father in the summers in his, in construction and learning carpentry work. That for sure gave you some, work ethic firsthand, seeing how to use tools, having to have, I would imagine, I'm not the most handy person, as my wife would attest, at home, but I know that it requires obviously some complex thinking and also even creative thinking when you're putting a project that has anything to do with building construction materials. How would you describe the construction? Here's the analogy, right? The construction of an organizational development strategy for businesses, that are looking to really get the right foundation, right? So your factors seem to be part of that foundation. But if someone had to start somewhere, right? So if you've got a marketing or sales leader that's listening to this and says, I know I need more training for my team. And I know I need training so that I can be, the train the trainer method. I can, really help my marketing and sales team accelerate and become better at what they do. But I need to become better. What are some, some insights or tips or strategies that you're seeing that can help them with that foundational base?
That's a great question. And that's one that every consulting client that I've had has asked, because at the essence of what we do on the people side of business has to drive organizational results. And that's where I always start. So if you are a small organization, you might have a basic HR function, and now you want to get up to the level of how do I help my people gain greater capabilities? And you want to know where to start. Don't start with the people side of business. Start with the organizational outcomes that you want to achieve. Start with your identity and your strategies, and then filter down to the goals. What are the goals that I want to achieve this year? And then you look at the people and say, do I have the people with the right capabilities in order to achieve those goals? And if not, from an organizational perspective, you do look at gaps. From an individual one-on-one perspective in working with people, you want to expand their strengths, not really look at the gaps. Zenger Miller, back at the time when it was Zenger Miller, had some really good research, and they published a book 2 years after mine that said basically the same thing, that a strengths-based approach works with individuals. But with an organization, I need to know where are those capability gaps. I also have to have a foundation of what are the desired behaviors for leaders in the workplace? What are the desired behaviors, even technical competencies for people in various roles? So that then I can determine as an organization, are we prepared to meet the needs of the business and help us move forward? Based upon that and identifying those gaps, then you can develop your initiatives. And the initiatives should really drive change that will help the organization move forward and achieve its mission and its vision and live its purpose and live its values.
So that was great, Michael. So you kind of almost gave us a pyramid. When you were talking,
Yes.
I was envisioning it sort of like a pyramid of where you have your foundational goals. You have your 7 factors that are all about strength-based,
Right.
And I like that you're describing the difference between strength-based and gap-based. When thinking about strength-based, just I would imagine that for, let's say an organization, a business-to-business organization that has a sales team, they've already identified who their top sales performers are. They've got new SDRs that are coming into the fold. Everyone these days is working from home. So what's the impact of being able to get those foundational processes in place with the, this work from home, kind of reality that we're living in? Where do you see, and what would be your advice for those companies that are trying to build this pyramid and now have to do it not face to face, but may have to actually do it with remote conversations, with remote team meetups? What are some tips? And maybe you guys are doing it right now at Broward Health, maybe not, I'm not sure. But can you get into that as well a little bit?
Yeah, we're managing people who work remotely, whether it's from home or any types of location that's not at the main location. It's challenging for leaders. Leaders have to lead in a very different way. If you think about the way most leaders lead today, leaders have a combination of things that they do. On one hand, they have key responsibilities and tasks that they need to perform, and projects and initiatives that they're in charge of in terms of their deliveries. On the other hand, they also have people that report to them.
Yeah.
And on the people side, when they're in the office, you can step outside of your office and walk down the hall and talk to someone. When they're not here, you have to be more purposeful, because it's really easy to be out of sight, out of mind. So you have to have frequent check-ins. You have to have, even if there's nothing to talk about, just checking in and say, hey, how are things going? With no agenda. Sometimes even spontaneous types of check-ins. Someone might be struggling with something and hasn't reached out to you yet, and you can help support that person in some way by pointing them down the right path. It has to be a lot more communication and a lot more deliberate, and that takes time. And a lot of leaders are saying, well, I've got 20 people that report to me. How can I possibly check in with every one of them? And I'm like, well, you don't have to check in with them individually necessarily. Bring a few of them together and just do a 5-minute check-in. The more frequently that you can check in, the more that you know that they're on path. The other thing is that as a remote leader, the nature of your role has to change, and those key responsibilities that are individual, those individual projects have to be diminished. The number of them has to be smaller so that you do now have time to actually lead people. It's funny that we're asking people in more of a tactical leadership role to be more of a leader. And you have to make that transition as a leader from, I own this project, I'm heads down doing it in my office, to I really have to be front and foremost with my people.
Well, you know what, you bring up a good point. So that transition from, let's say, an individual contributor that might have been a rock star to then moving their way up to an actual, leadership role, right? So going into a director level or even VP, you're right, does require a total different bag of obligations and strategies to organize your time better, probably. Now, because of all the technology we have for Zoom conferences and all these virtual types of meetings, I presume, and I know, and I've heard from other, software company leaders in marketing per se, let's say, or sales, having, weekly touch bases with the whole group, and then maybe having, one or two, private, let's say, meetings with either certain folks that are needing the additional help, or maybe it's because there's questions about a specific project or a specific client, and it requires to have those one-on-one meetings. But I agree that right now the challenge probably is, and it's an obvious one, is that even though we're all working remote, or most of us, let's say, are working remote, it's getting, you still theoretically only have that 8-hour work hour time frame. But the truth is that it's blending into weekends, it's blending into after hours, and you just got to find a time that makes sense for your teams, right? So I know that an organization that I heard the other day talk about how they do it, and this was early on when the global pandemic really hit us hard in COVID-19, they were having Mondays, how are you doing? nothing to do with the business. It was, how are you doing Mondays almost, the first half of it. The latter part of the meeting was, all right, let's talk about projects, campaigns, customer support. What are we doing with XYZ product launch, right? But they really made an effort and a big emphasis on checking out, just, checking in on how people were doing, right? Since we were all getting we're getting in front of this a little bit, somewhat, right? Now you fast forward, we're almost 6 months into it. In your industry, I know you still have doctors that are, you're right now in a different, you're in a different vertical, right? But outside of that vertical where people are literally frontline having to go into, nursing and ICUs and doctors and the healthcare hospital systems, you can imagine how folks that are able to do and work remote, and many are doing that now, how the leaders are strained in how am I going to balance both my responsibilities to my C-levels and stakeholders and my responsibilities to my director level mid-managers on how I'm helping, steer this ship, right?
Yeah.
So that I think it's a lot to chew on. It's a lot to kind of try to unpack. But I think, would you agree that if all the foundational things are done right, the rest of it are just tactics and using maybe technology to help with the communication? Is that kind of correct in what you're trying to?
Kinda not. And the reason I say that is because I've seen a couple different mindsets in leaders. One is that I have all these things to do, and they lead with tactics and hope that they get the outcomes that they want. Mm-hmm. The opposite tactic is to start with strategy, if I could use the word, or overuse the word tactic. Starting with strategy. What is it that I want to accomplish, and what's the best path to get there? How do I get these outcomes? In hospitals, patient care and patient outcomes rule the day. We want positive outcomes for every single patient, exemplary positive outcomes for them and their families. And so at the end of the day, no matter what role you're in, if you're just a transporter and I go to a room and I get a patient and I take them to x-ray, that's part of the system. And that's part of the family that works here. And we all have to be working together. And so as a leader on that floor, for example, I need to pull them in and say, this is what we want to achieve. And this is your role in it. And then we can have those 5-10 minute check-in huddles. How's it going? This is one thing I want you to know today. I'm here to support you type of huddles. And then we can have one-on-ones as well. And then we can have team meetings about the business.
I like that. I like how you're breaking it down to chunks of, the one-on-ones, the 5-minute huddles, and then into maybe team huddings that talk maybe more macro, right? Not so micro. So I think that is some really good advice. Like I said, the folks that are going to be listening to this are probably also in B2B. They're in different verticals, but if they're in marketing or software or anything related with software, most, if not all, are doing work remote, and are anticipating doing that into the next year until we understand what's going to happen as we open up the economy and get back to physical, locations and working from our offices. So I think it's a really important highlight that you mentioned. Another one that I took away from this call today with you, Michael, is the whole emphasis on the positive. So double down on positive strengths that your team may have or individual members within your team. And instead of looking at the gap analysis of where they really have a weakness, focus on their strengths, build maybe a bridge towards that weakness, but really more than anything, focus on the positive reinforcement. It sounds like, right? The recognition, which I think just goes back to your education and your background on industrial psychology, right? Which is the human condition is a human condition. We all love positive reinforcement. We'll all perform better if we hear more of that more often. And if we also genuinely hear probably constructive criticism, because that's part of it too, right? It can't all be cheer, cheer, cheer. There are some times when you have those tough talks. And I think, at least in my personal opinion, when you have a leader that you respect, that has earned your respect and your trust, you also do appreciate when you have those candid and firm discussions on where you can improve. It's funny because typically the best leaders make it into the sandwich, right? They give you a positive, they give you maybe some constructive criticism or where you can improve, and they ended up with a positive, right? The kind of
Yeah,
the positive
actually, I want to stop
affirmation
on
sandwich.
that for a moment, Gianni,
Sure.
because actually, over the past 10 years, the research has shown that that's not an effective tactic.
So it's not.
No, the sandwich approach leaves people thinking, well, they're positioning it as being nice with the first positive, and then they tell me what they really think, and then they want to soften the blow. And all they remember is that middle part of formative feedback. The best leaders that I've seen that have helped people improve where things don't go well, because like you said, it's not all rainbows and butterflies.
Yep.
There are times where I have not performed well, and I've really appreciated the way that when I've had good leaders, I've appreciated the way that they've approached it. When I've had bad leaders, it could be the exact same feedback, but because it was delivered in the wrong way, because it was the leader coming down on me and yelling at me or telling me that, no, you messed up here, this is what you have to do, that fell on deaf ears. What happens is that there's the attribution theory, meaning that people make either internal or external attributions. And what I've found is that when good leaders are delivering formative feedback for improvement, people make an internal attribution and say, I need to change. When a bad leader might give you the exact same feedback or might talk about this exact same thing that you need to do different, you start to think about, it's not me, it's them. That person's just a jerk. So it doesn't lead to as much change.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad you corrected me on that, because I often did find it a bit, to your point, condescending that they would do the sandwich, because you sort of know, to your point, that their real motivation behind that discussion is what's in the middle. So I'm glad that you brought up the research behind it, and that also you're noticing that talent management professionals are helping leaders move away from that as a tactic, right, because it's really not serving them well long term.
I'm also I've formed a new model for delivering feedback. I don't have it fully fleshed out. I'm writing an article on it now that hopefully will get picked up and published.
Great. I'll add it to my show notes if you do have it on time. I'll be probably putting this out in August. But yeah, definitely anything to do with research based and your models would be really welcome to, especially those folks that want to really bite down on the research behind, IO and organizational and training and development. So, but go ahead. What's the model like? If you could give us maybe a little bit of a preview.
A lot of the models for delivering feedback spell out a process saying, this is specifically what I saw. This is the consequence of what I saw. This is what you could do different next time. And this would be the positive consequence if you improve. That is still the leader telling the person. And even great leaders who use that model, it's still the leader telling that person. And part of it does get through, especially if you have a leader that you really respect and admire. But some of it doesn't. So the model that I've created for delivering feedback is to take more of a coaching approach. And the essence of coaching is inquiry. In coaching, we want to balance inquiry and advocacy. So inquiry is asking questions, open-ended questions that help people think about things at a deeper level. Advocacy is where in coaching you might suggest a path of action, but it's still up to the individual. You still leave that door open for them to decide whether or not they want to do it. It's not telling, which is also advocacy, but from a different perspective. So feedback works best when I say, so I saw what you did in that meeting in terms of presenting your thoughts to the group. What's one thing that you think you could do different next time to be better? Right. And letting them self-assess and create their own feedback by thinking it through. If they're accurately self-assessing, you go with it, because development is a journey. It's not just from one point to another point and then you're done for the rest of your life.
That's an interesting feedback model and a feedback loop where it's more on the coaching and the advocacy. I like that. And coming from being a coach for little under 6, under 8, and under 13 boys and girls soccer, I agree that people, when you think about sports and as a sports analogy, people get inspired by the coaches that give them that sort of latitude, right, to fail and or succeed on their own. So I like that.
That's
so
motivational speaking. That's not coaching.
right,
There's
correct.
a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, let's maybe to kind of wrap this up a bit, if you could just take us through what you're seeing right now are the most important things to do if you have a remote workforce. What are some things that you can strive for the end of this year, right? Until we know what happens with COVID-19.
Yeah.
And maybe leave us with what are your all-time favorite books to read that might be on your in your space, in your industry, in your profession or not. And if the second question is, and if you could speak to your 20-something-year-old self, right? If you had a chance to get on a time machine, what advice would you give that young Michael around either your career path journey and
Right.
or what you would have done differently, if anything?
Well, I'm only 29, so just kidding.
That's great. Yes, you're
So
only
what I'm seeing
as
right
old
now-
as you feel. I get it.
That's right. So what I'm seeing right now in terms of working with remote employees, there's a few factors that I would say that are most important. First and foremost is clear expectations, so that people have a very clear understanding of what they should be working on, what are the deliverables, what are the tools and resources they might need, and make sure that you're providing that. What are they responsible for? How are you going to support them? All of those up front, it has to be a lot clearer, because they generally won't just tap you on the shoulder and ask a question. Another thing in working with remote people is leverage technology. Here at Broward Health, we're using Microsoft Teams. Whatever platform it is that you use, it doesn't matter. They all have benefits and drawbacks.
Sure.
But make sure that you're just pinging people online, just very quickly. Hey, how's it going? Something like that. Or I'm working on this. What do you think? And just constantly have those conversations you normally would in the hallway, but virtually, and leveraging that technology. And then the other thing is check in a lot more frequently than you purposely check in when they're here. So by purposely checking in, I mean that I'm setting up meetings with my staff that's here working in the office with me. But if they're working remotely, I have to check in a lot more frequently to make sure that I'm supporting them and that they're aligned with where we need to go.
Excellent. And then in terms of a book or books that you would recommend, right?
Yeah.
For people listening, I'm a firm believer that leaders are readers. So I know you're a leader, so I'm curious to know what books you've read, recently, and or some that you would recommend.
There's a few that are top of my list. One that is always on the top of my list is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
That's a great one.
Classic bestseller for a reason. It's because there's so many things in that book that really, really help a leader get to the next level.
Absolutely.
Another one is by Patrick Lencioni. It's called The Advantage. He wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a great book. But he also wrote a lesser known book called The Advantage, which talks about the pillars of organizational health. And I think that's a really important book. It's one of those hidden gems in leadership development. Another one is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown.
Yes.
I'm just finishing up that book, and it's got so many incredible nuggets.
Yeah, she's great. Great author, great speaker.
Yeah,
that's a good one. So that's Brené Brown, Dare to Lead.
Yes.
And what would you tell your 20-year-old self? Doing a little bit of what is it, Monday quarterbacking or rear view mirroring. What would you do different in your journey, in your career path, and or not?
I know it sounds kind of cliche, but don't sweat the small stuff. That saying's been around forever for a reason.
Yeah, I love it.
I found that there's very little that truly matters long term, and overemphasize the things that have long-term impact and underemphasize the things that have short-term impact. I see so many people driving down the street and someone cuts them off and they get all bent out of shape. and it really doesn't matter. As long as they're safe, who cares if some jerk cut you off?
Sure.
Now let them, I laugh at them because they're the ones that are putting themselves at risk. As long as I'm safe, I'm fine.
Yes.
But where's my son going to go to college? You know, that's a pretty big decision. It doesn't mean it can't be undone. It just means that it's a big decision for him.
Right.
And I want to be part of his success, so I want to support him in that decision. And
hey, that's a great way to end it, I think, because this program is about diversity. It's also about inclusion, but it's also about what are we leaving behind for our children. And part of your acknowledgement that don't sweat the small stuff, focus on the stuff that matters, I think is something that could ring true both in business and life. So I really appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah, he plays baseball. Just to add a little bit of a sports analogy, I've always focused on his core mechanics, whether he's hitting the ball or fielding or pitching. It all comes down to the core mechanics. And if his core mechanics are solid, everything else will be built on that. If he strikes out 3 times in a game and he's only up 3 times, you know what? It's not the last game he'll ever play. Work on your mechanics. Get those fundamentals down. Maybe it was just an off day. Who cares? I don't focus on the performance. I focus on the learning. And those with a learning orientation go much further than those with a performance orientation. Because learning is a forever journey. Performance is a one and done. If you focus on the one and done, then you're toast. You're never going to improve.
I love that. Lifelong learning over over and done performance. We could all be one-hit wonders at work or in life, but it's the long game. It's the marathon, not the sprint, that we should be always focused on. So I really appreciate it. Words of wisdom, words from I've been there, done that I think listeners will appreciate.